We're live, Madam Chair.
Good afternoon, folks. This is House Corrections and Institutions. It is Tuesday, April 22nd. This is our 1 o'clock meeting, and we're working again on some new language for our county courthouses in terms of the process of side judges from individual counties requesting capital funds for their courthouse, and there is a current process in place that they need to present the request to the court administrator. And in testimony, we are trying to, tighten up the language a little bit and also bring more information that the side judges should give the court administrator in determining whether or not state capital funds should be used for some of the projects. So Eric Fitzpatrick is with us from Lodge Council. Eric, it's all yours if you can introduce yourself for the record. And we do have a new draft 2.1, and the changes are highlighted in yellow. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the chair and to the committee. This is Eric Fitzpatrick, excuse me, with the Office of Legislative Counsel, here, as the chair indicated, to discuss with the committee a new draft 2.1 of a proposed amendment to, it's actually the way it's framed now is a proposed amendment to the miscellaneous judiciary bill, which is S109. It's currently in the House Judiciary Committee. So to the extent that the committee may decide to approve some language, that's a place that it could go. The topic, as the chair also indicated, is revolving around something that's in statute already. And in statute, it's specifically in Title IV, the judiciary title of the Vermont statutes. When a county requests capital funds for its courthouse or for court operations, they are required to submit the request to the court administrator. And then the statute contains a list of criteria that the court administrator reviews, looks at in conjunction with the capital request that comes in from the county. And then the court administrator makes a recommendation to BGS as to whether or not that capital request should be included in the judiciary's annual request for the governor's budget. So that's the sort of structure of the process as it appears in statute now. As the chair indicated, the topic that the committee has been looking at is, well, should there be more detail around this process? Should there be more specifics required in the county's request for capital projects? Should there be more information provided so that the court administrator has more information to consider when they're deciding whether or not, because they're required by the statute to make a recommendation regarding the request. Excuse me. So the draft that you looked at last time attempted to do some of that and to add some more specifics to what would have to be in the request from the county for a capital project. And as you see, there's some proposed additional language in yellow that's highlighted on the version that you're looking at now. The changes, whether they're struck through or underlined, do indicate what changes there are in the language between the first draft and the draft that you're reviewing now for this amendment. So the first one actually is just a clarification of a term that you see in the existing statute, and that's in subsection A on page 1. You see the way the non-highlighted language. So in sub A, the first sentence there says, so every year before October 1st, any county requesting capital funds for its courthouse or court operations has to submit this request to the court administrator. So the second sentence that's proposed to be added just clarifies that the term court operations does not include operating expenses. So these are capital projects, not operating expenses, just to make that point unambiguous. So that's the first proposed change. Before we get to, because you'll see there's a couple of statutes referred to in this second subsection B. I printed out a handout, or actually I put together a handout, and I think they'll pass it out. I see everybody, I think, has copies of it. So these are a couple of existing statutes. So if you look at the first, there's one on each page. I'd say first, if you might, just for a moment, look at section 133. So if you look at one side of it, it's the section 133 county tax amount assessment. Right? So again, this is existing law. So this again is some process that's already provided for. And it's in Title 24, which is the municipal law, municipal government title of the Vermont statutes. And provides, you see in subsection A, that there's this requirement annually, assistant judges shall, it's a requirement, shall prepare a proposed budget of the county for the ensuing year. So every year they have to do this budget. So we skip a little bit there. That's not really relative to this, but you move down to subsection E. And this is talking about the budget. Again, we have a shall there in the first line. The proposed budget shall contain any cost estimates and preliminary plans for capital construction in the county. Right? So it's got to be included in this budget every year. There has to be some estimates and preliminary plans for any capital construction projects, and that has to include estimates of the indebtedness, probable expenses, et cetera, all other expenses and obligations. So that has to be a piece of this annual budget. So then we move down to subdivision 3, though. We're going to skip over that second one. Go to the third one. And this says, pursuant to a capital program, which we'll get to in a second, but there's a capital program that's going to be on the other side of this page. But pursuant to a capital program, as described in section 4430, the budget may, see, so this is different in that line. The budget may also include. So this is not a requirement. This is an option. May include a provision, separate reserve fund for capital construction, reconstruction, remodeling, repairs, renovation, design, redesign, et cetera. And this goes on to say some specifics about it. Can't exceed 75% of the current budget. But a very important point there is the fact that it's discretionary and mandatory. It's a may. So it may include this capital reserve fund. But it might not. It might or it might. So you might have a provision establishing this separate fund to pay for those kind of projects, but it might not. It's the way I read that anyway, it's a matter of discretion for the county. So as I mentioned, it refers to, it says pursuant to a capital program. This is the first line of that subdivision 3 again. Pursuant to a capital program as described in section 4430. But that's on the other side of your page. 4430 does talk about the capital budget. And this is going to, I think there's some language is going to have to be tweaked in the amendment. But this is a separate section of Title 24, and this refers to the municipal budget, I believe, not the county budget. This section 4430 that you're looking at. So that's not limited to just the county budget. It's the budget of the municipality. And that budget does have to, as you see in subsection A, list and describe the capital projects to be undertaken during the coming fiscal year, including the estimated cost, proposed method of financing, et cetera. And a second sentence describes what a capital program is. A capital program is a plan of capital projects proposed to be undertaken during each of the following 5 years, including their estimated costs and their proposed method. So the capital budget has to include any capital projects that are going to be done in the next year. And the capital program, which also has to be there, the way I read it, is the plan for all the projects that are going to be done during the next 5 years. So that's kind of a bigger picture look at what the capital projects are going to be for that municipality.
Well, let me stop you there, if I may. So in 4430, capital budget program, that refers to the municipal budget and capital budget.
I believe
not
so.
The county budget.
Correct.
And not the county capital budget.
Right.
But what we're referencing in section 133 is in number 3, pursuant to a capital program as described in section 4430. So if the county has a capital program, it needs to be laid out as your municipal capital program is laid out. Is that what it's saying?
It's an interesting question. I was also running this by Tim Devlin, who's our attorney who handles municipal issues. And it's a little unclear what that phrase means.
Which phrase?
As described in section 4430.
Right.
It's definitely, as you mentioned, it's a cross-reference to 4430 to the municipal budget. What is that? Pursuant to a capital program as described in 4430. So does that mean that if the county decides to have this capital reserve fund does that mean that it has to be included in the municipal capital budget as well? Is that what that is
I don't know, you're the
referencing?
lawyer, you-
I know. Yeah. That's true. Sometimes.
Hey, Greg.
Make something up, we'll believe it.
Yeah, I don't want to do that because I could well be wrong, especially in this case, because that's a little unclear, that phrase. I'd be interested to hear what maybe the people who practice in this area, who have worked with this language, whether it be the court administrator or the assistant judges themselves, how that's been interpreted. Have they interpreted that to mean that a provision for a capital reserve fund has to be incorporated into the county or into the municipal capital budget, or does it just mean that it has to reference it somehow, or that it has to be consistent? Because it does say as described it. So maybe it's just that the capital reserve fund has to be consistent with the capital program that the municipality has developed under 4430.
So,
Doesn't make any sense.
I says, wasn't the local, St. Albans City Council once upon a time, and the only thing we got from the county was an assessment. That's how it showed in our budget.
Yeah, the municipal budget.
County, it just says county assessment. That's obviously there was the number that there was a budget that came from, but that was the information that we received.
So if the county has a capital program,
Right.
the capital program would be defined like the capital program for the municipality is defined.
That may be what they're trying to say.
That's my layman's interpretation. It's not a legal interpretation. So if the county has a capital program, it needs to be proposed to be undertaken during each of the following 5 years. So that's your rolling 5-year plan. It may include a separate reserve fund for those capital construction, reconstruction, remodeling, blah, blah, blah. And if they have a reserve fund, it does not exceed 75% of the current county budget.
This is foolish, but I think the way I'm reading this is that you may not have capital projects identified, but you could be reserving capital for future projects up to 75% of the current budget. If you, even though you don't have any capital projects planned for the next 5 years, you could be setting aside money up to 75% for a future project, a capital project that hasn't been specified yet.
And where are you picking up that connection?
Because it's a may in number 3. You can be setting up a savings account even if you don't have a particular capital project in your capital program plan right now.
What I read is you have a capital program, but you may have a reserve fund. You don't need a reserve fund for it.
Right. I think the municipality has to have the capital program under 4430, right? And then as you say, I think you both said, but the municipality has the capital program under 4430. The county may or may not have the capital reserve fund. But if they do, they choose to have it. And again, I don't think you're right, it probably doesn't depend on the existence of a particular capital project or not. They can either choose to have the fund if they want to or not.
Right.
But somehow or other, it has to be tied into that capital program. I guess that's how.
But the county capital budget, the municipal capital budget does
Right.
not include the county capital budget.
No, I don't believe so.
It does not.
Oh, they're two separate budgets.
Separate things.
Yes.
So when it talks about a capital program on the municipal end for their municipal capital projects, It's a plan for those projects that are to be undertaken during each of the following 5 years. So that's your 5-year capital plan that the municipality has.
Right.
And there's an estimate to those project costs and a proposed method of financing. So if we're saying, that's for the municipal, if we're saying in section 133, this pertains to the county budget,
Right.
if the county is putting together a budget, county budget needs to contain the cost estimates and preliminary plans for capital construction in the county. And pursuant to a capital program, so if the county has a capital program, it has to follow what's in statute for the municipal capital program or capital plan. It may include a reserve fund.
Maybe that's right. Maybe it's that they only, you could read it that way, that they only may have this capital reserve fund. Although, but that's not, I was going to say if the county has a capital program, but county capital program is required in the municipality. So
But
that,
it's not required in the municipality. I mean, in the county.
right.
Connor, yeah, your hand up.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, it's confusing to me as well. I could probably interpret it a couple different ways. For the purpose of S 109 and the amendment we're making, does it actually matter? Because aren't they going to have that separate fund and show evidence that they're contributing to it to be eligible for these capital projects as the court administrators looking at everything? So
Well,
you could have it, you could not have it, but you probably should have it if you're asking for state dollars, but
So why don't we go through the language, the new language on B?
Yeah.
That might help.
Just to respond to that question real quickly, though. The fact that whether or not they have a capital reserve fund is not a requirement, not a precondition for them to get their funding request approved. It's just added, the way the language is written, it's just added to the factors that the court administrator considers.
right.
It's not an automatic disqualifier. In other words, if you don't have a capital reserve fund, does that mean you can't get your request approved? Not the way it's written now. It's just added
Okay.
to the criteria.
I just be thinking you'd want to be building your case with all these things, if you're making a
You'd think
request.
it would be helpful, but it is an option. So, but you might, when we look at the language, sort of circumvent what it means about the interrelationship between the two statutes just by dropping a couple of words, is what I thought. So what you propose to do to add to this criteria that the court administrator considers when they're deciding whether or not to make a recommendation up or down on this county's budget request, you see there's 3 basically new criteria that are added on page 1 to the existing list, which is on page 2. So the first one is whether the funding request is consistent. And what I would say there, because we were just saying that first 4430 capital program is not a county capital program. So you'd strike the word county right there. And then that sentence would be an accurate description of 4430. So it would read whether the funding request is consistent with the capital program developed pursuant to 24 VSA 4430. So remember, we talked about that. The municipality has to have this capital program. So that would be a factor for them to consider. Well, is this new proposal consistent with the municipality's capital program?
But the municipality capital program does not include any county capital infrastructure.
Right. So there might not be enough of a relationship.
It would be included in the county budget that is submitted to the municipality. But does that county budget, when it's submitted to the municipality, include a breakdown of where all those dollars are going? Because then how would the court administrator know what's in the municipal capital plan for the county?
And whether it's consistent or not.
Yeah, I mean, if we took out county's capital program and just whether the funding request is consistent with a capital program developed pursuant to 24 VSA 4430, that's your municipal capital budget and program. And your municipal capital program does not include construction of your county courthouses or sheriffs, I don't believe. It only takes care of municipal capital projects.
I think that's right. So you may not want this factor in there at all if there's no connection.
You think it's right or it is right?
I think it's accurate if you remove the word county. The question is not whether it's accurate, is whether or not there's any connection.
Yeah, there was.
I mean,
an
You're almost setting up an expectation that it would be in there, but there's no reason why it would be in there.
maybe
So
not.
it's just a weird expectation, or it's a weird consideration for the court administrator to have when there's no reason the municipality would be putting this into a capital program. So why are we setting it up as a consideration?
Right.
That's why you're here tonight.
And then I think you'd have a similar question with respect to criteria number 2,
Yeah.
because that's also about whether the project that is the subject of the request, so in other words, the part of this county budget request that's identified a particular project, whether that has been included in the list of capital projects in this municipal budget under 4430. But as the chair mentioned, and as you mentioned too, it wouldn't be in that budget necessarily anyway. So,
And there's no equivalent capital program for the county.
the only one that I'm aware of is the one on the other page.
And that links to 4430 in a weird, well.
That's what we have, yeah, right.
Can the court administrator tell us how it actually runs now?
I don't think they're, Terry, good luck.
Well, Terry on State Court Administrator, Eric, if the reference was 24 VSA section 133 though,
Yeah,
Yeah, right.
that does describe the county budget specifically.
right. And that's in subdivision 3. So that is in there.
But you could have it in subdivision 2, because part 2 now talks about the capital projects in the county's budget, and that is in 24 VSA 133, as is criterion 3, but that refers to the capital reserve fund, so that's separate.
Right.
So if you change the 4430 to 133E in criterion 2, that would make sense.
So it's whether or not it's exactly the same language, but conceptually, the idea is that whether or not this particular request has previously been included in the county budget. Is that the idea?
Yeah, because it's your county budget that's going to determine.
The budget is for the next ensuing year, the capital program is for 5 years. And whether the county has one, and Judge McKeeman may be the best person to say whether or not a capital program ever factors into her county budget, at least, to know if that's something that's done. But I think it would be relevant whether or not the request is on the list of capital projects in the county's budget, the 1-year county budget. Or also relevant is whether the county has established a capital reserve fund. They have the option to or not. And that's also 24 VSA 133.
So it would just be, I think I'm following that now.
So just keep it 24 VSA 133E and not have any reference to 24 4430.
Correct. So you keep 2 and 3, but just change the citation, the cross-reference on line 16 and 17 from 24 VSA 4430 to 24 VSA 133. And you keep your subdivision 3 as is.
I've interpreted the reference in 133 to the capital program that is described in section 4430 as section 4430 just describing a capital program in general, not the municipal capital program, because as everybody's pointed out, it wouldn't normally be part of, like, the Rutland County Courthouse wouldn't be part of the Rutland City capital program.
Right.
It just wouldn't play a factor, but I thought 4430 kind of described in general what a capital program would consist of. And the county would have the option to have a capital program or not. To me, it would be good governance too, but that's how I was interpreting it, but it is not clear. What the intent is here.
So you're just 4430 is in 133, 4430 is just presented as an example of a capital program.
Right, if you have a capital program.
Yeah.
4430 lays out. kind of
Might be a good one to
what
look at.
components is.
Yeah.
Kind of a model sort of thing.
Kind of. And I looked also, I mean, 2024 is municipal and county government,
Right.
but it's not clear. I mean, it should be more clearly stated, I think.
That's my concern, because I think we're making it more confusing than solving the issue.
So,
So could you, I wonder if in one, you just keep silent in terms of whether the funding request is consistent with the county's capital program, period. Or semicolon. And whether and two, whether the project that is subject of the request has been included in the list of capital projects in the county's budget pursuant to 24 VSA 133. And 133E is your connection to section 4430.
so then you would keep subdivision 3 as is, right? Which is that whether the county has established a capital reserve fund. Because remember, one of the very first things we mentioned is that that's discretionary. That's a may. The county doesn't have to establish a capital reserve fund. But whether or not they did might be relevant for the court administrator to think about when they're evaluating the request.
And if so, how
Right.
robust is it?
Right. What kind of contributions have they made?
Yeah.
I think it's important, and maybe I'm speaking out of turn for the court administrator, but I would think if a county is coming to a court administrator for requests for state capital funds for their courthouse, that the court administrator would want to know that that funding request is consistent with the county's capital plan or program, however you want to phrase it.
You mean that very first one, subdivision 1 is what you're referring to?
Yeah, and then if it's consistent with the county's capital program, to see if it's included in the list of capital projects in the county's budget pursuant to 133E, which lays out that the budget would contain cost estimates and preliminary plans for capital construction. And that the capital program is laid out like the municipal capital programs are laid out, and that the budget may include a reserve fund.
Just one clarification, if I might. Section 1 still wouldn't need to be pursuant to 4430. It only still needs to be pursuant to 133. So there's no need to mention 4430 in this bill at all. Aside from, there's no need.
There's no
It's
need,
all 133.
because if you look at 133, in terms of the program, it's gonna kick you over to 4430.
That's correct.
And I would just suggest that it's with a county's capital program, not the county's capital program, because there may not be one in point 1. Or with any existing county's capital program.
Or you could say with the county's capital program, if any.
Sure.
Something.
Oh,
like
don't
that.
go with if any. We've gone down that road. But you could do if any.
I just don't think you should use the, because that presumes that there is one, and
Right.
there's no
In some counties.
requirement that there is. pursuant to 133.
Right, it might not even, what if you did, you don't even need the word county. You just say whether the funding request, oh, yeah, good, right, with a capital program. Developed pursuant to, 133. Because that's also not required the way I read it,
I
right?
agree.
Yeah.
So what you're proposing for lines 13 for the committee to follow would be whether the funding request is consistent with a capital program
Mm-hmm.
developed pursuant to 24 VSA section 133. Right?
Yes.
So Joyce, I hope you're following along because we are going to get to you for testimony here. And then lines 15 through 17, it would read, and whether the project that is subject of this request has been included in the list of capital projects in the county's budget pursuant to 24 VSA section 133E. And 133E includes 1, 2, 3, and 4. And if so, the description of the project included in the budget.
Yes. Yep, I think that's right.
And then 3 would read, whether the county has established a capital reserve fund pursuant to 24 VSA 133E3, which that's the section that talks about a reserve fund.
Mhm.
And if so, the amount of annual contributions the county has made to the fund. So we took out where the court administrator had to determine whether the county has made sufficient annual contributions. We took that completely out. So the funding request would have to be consistent with the county's capital program. And there would need to be a list of the projects to see if those projects have been listed in the county's budget. And also, if there's a reserve fund, what the amount of those annual contributions that the county has made to the fund. That's what those 3, 1, 2, and 3 say. Is my interpretation. I may be off base.
No, the way they would be rewritten, I think that's right.
Is that what we want?
I'm gonna say, have we already agreed on what we wanted to say? Not how to say it, but what we wanted to say?
Well, we want to make sure how it's stated here legally is what we want it to say.
So we've already agreed on what it should say?
I think so.
Last week we did. I thought we did.
I don't see any requirement in here for consistent raising of funds across each county. I thought that's something we wanted them to do, is look ahead and have a reasonable tax, putting it into a reserve, and I don't see that anywhere.
Well, that would be number 3. Whether the county has established a capital reserve fund, because some counties don't have one. And if they have one, what the amount of the annual contribution has been made to the fund. So that would get at, well, you've had this capital reserve fund, but you haven't put anything in it for 4 years.
And I thought we wanted we wanted to tell them they need to do that.
That was fine. But doesn't mean I'm wrong.
I think that's a
Well,
distinction, and I wouldn't, that wasn't my understanding, but I think it would be an overreach for us to tell counties how they're going to budget and what they're going to assess.
Oh, unless you throw in the part, which is, if you don't do this, we're not giving you any money. And then
That could very well be.
Yeah,
But that doesn't need to be-
What we're trying do is come up with
That's-
criteria.
And it's,
I think that's implied with this, right?
well, if you listen to
Well, if we-
Carolyn Partridge's
Yeah,
testimony, they don't have a capital plan. and they don't have a reserve fund. But if they know that they've got a project that they need to do, they will incorporate the money in their county budget for that project. So you've got to allow some flexibility in law to allow that scenario to play out.
But I was under the impression that we're just strongly encouraging counties to do this.
That it may have an impact on.
On whether or not they receive
Yeah.
capital bill funding.
But secondary to that though, so this is where it sucks because my take is, well, you don't do these things, you don't plan accordingly, then we don't give you any money.
Right.
But then we really don't have a choice because at the end of the day, we have to give them money because we need the court to run. You know what I mean? So like,
That's why,
to me, that's why I'm with Kevin, where we hold them to the fire. So you have to be putting money in for your own repairs.
Right.
Well, again, will it be in our best interest to have the parties involved, like we said they could do, but over the next couple of months, meet and have language to come back to us and iron out what actually is being done or not? We keep kind of going around the bend, and I'm afraid we're going to, what's the word I'll use here, make a bigger mess of it. I want it so it's easy to follow. They've got enough hard work to do without, and doing these funds and everything else. Let them figure it out and come back to us. But I don't know
We've done that.
what's a,
We've done that. In that, what we have said, this is where we want to go. What's highlighted, that becomes effective July 1st, 2026.
Yes, that's a great segue, Representative Morrissey, to page 3. So the way it's written, it's proposed, it's one way to think about approaching that very issue is everything that you just talked about, however the language is hammered out, doesn't go into effect right away.
I understand that.
Yeah. And then you require this
But
report.
it's concerning to me that you, as an outstanding attorney,
Oh,
kind
thank
of
you.
going, I think this is what it means. That bothers me. I want to know what it means so that we can make an appropriate decision. And so that's bothersome. I keep hearing, I think. So,
Yes. I think the language that you'll settle on will be at least clear as to what is being done here. The existing statutory language, that odd cross-reference that's in the existing statute, sometimes the language is not as clear as you wish it would be. But as far as the language you're proposing for this, I think it will be clear.
you said, I think again.
Oh, I'm sure that will be
When
clear.
we're gone and all of us are gone and no one is going, what did they mean? I'm not trying to be a stickler about this.
No, not at all.
I'm concerned about this.
So let's go to the report.
Yes.
That's what we've got in the interim. The new language, that doesn't go into effect until July 1st, 26.
Right.
So it gives all this summer, this fall, next legislative session for the ability to tweak more language for it to become effective July 1st next year. So it's really to have the parties sit down and work through. They know what direction we're heading in. They can work through this. And if there is recommendations or changes to that language, they can come back to us in January and let us know, because the law doesn't go into, the new changes don't go into effect until July 1st of 26, but it gives all the parties an indication of what we're looking. Gives them a box to work in. If you don't have some language, they don't have a box to work in. So one thing, Eric, in terms of the report, on or before January 15th of next year,
Mhm.
the report comes back to our committees and the institutions committee. Who submits who's going to do that report?
All right. Thank you. Nice catch. And I was just adding another, just based on what you're saying, you could also add in here any proposed legislative changes necessary to, effectuate the purposes of this act or something like that. If you want, because like, as you were saying, Representative Emmons, as they're meeting in the summer and fall, they may have some other thoughts as to what might be done to add to them. But as far as the who,
So the side judges, you're the court administrator? Because we'd like the side judges to meet and talk about the language. But we'd also like to have, I believe, the court administrator at the table as well.
mhm.
We talked about, that's what I asked for last week.
So
You certainly could do that. Could do the Office of the Court Administrator and is there association, is the Association of Side Judges?
It's called the Association of County Judges.
Association of
It's
County
going to be in consultation with.
Right.
in consultation with the court administrator?
Court administrator, that way I'm happy to take responsibilities of, in consultation with the Association of County Judges. If that would be helpful.
So you would report back to us on the progress made to implement the provisions of this act. And the report would include a description of steps taken, any proposed legislative session, and processes considered to ensure that capital budget requests are included in the information required. 2, 3, 4. So we want the parties to work together, figure out how you would implement the new language that we're putting in section 34A. And any proposed legislative changes that are needed.
As Judge McKeeman mentioned, there's a judicial college at which the assistant judges participate. And I'm happy to request time because I think they're all there at that time. Would be ideal for addressing this, and maybe even I'm thinking devising a form that could be completed if somebody is to make a request under 439 and include all the criteria. Hopefully spelled out as clearly as possible to help meet the criteria.
So Eric, you're thinking, would it be good to go to Joyce McKeeman and hear the side judges take in terms of the new language we're looking, as well as the report back? Okay, so,
Unless there's any more questions for me, but I think we've gone through the
Right.
text. Yep.
so Joyce, welcome. You've been patient. I appreciate it. You've heard us go round and round and round here. So if you could introduce yourself for the record and weigh in on the conversation that we've just had, trying to clarify the process.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm Joyce McKeeman. I'm an Orange County Assistant Judge, and I'm president of the Vermont Association of County Judges, which is the formal name for the organization that represents all of the 28 independently elected assistant judges. Thank you so much for having me and letting me weigh in today. I appreciate that very much. So we had a chance to meet together as assistant judges Friday afternoon to bring everybody up to speed on what's been happening in committee. We didn't take any votes, but there is a sense among the membership that our position really is that the existing 4 VSA 39B7 already gives the court administrator the authority to consider, it says any other criteria is deemed appropriate by the court administrator when weighing these capital requests. So, our position is that existing 39B7 already gives the court administrator this authority, but understanding that the committee is looking with this new language, which I have read and have in front of me. Let me just clarify just a little bit. Current practice, and I can't speak for every county because they're not here right with me, but generally, when we train assistant judges about the use of these reserve funds, and I say we because there's an education committee that trains new assistant judges as they come in, that this the training generally is that this reserve fund authorized under section 133, 24 VSA 133, isn't a piggy bank. It's subject to a capital plan or program. Typically we use the word plan, and that section 4430 is the template, as you may, of what needs to be included in a capital plan. And I don't know, I've seen some counties' formal plans. I don't know that everybody has one, but it's one of the things that's clearly on our radar screen now that we need to talk about. So that slight confusion there about how does 4430 play in, I think it just says to the county government, which is the assistant judges, you need to have a formal plan for what you're going to do with these funds. I do want to bring up another point, which is, and I've mentioned this before, is that Washington County had almost $450,000 in their reserve fund when they were hit by the flood in 2023, and they used every penny of that in flood remediation. And so they now have zero in their fund. There's only so much that a county budget can bear in terms of replenishing a depleted fund. And again, I just want the committee to keep in mind that when we're talking about the reserve funds, in almost every county, that fund is for capital projects at the courthouse, yes, and that's what is before us today. But that fund is also being held in reserve for sheriff's department buildings, many of which are fairly old, and also a few counties have then a separate county building that they're responsible for. So just please keep in mind that any one capital plan and any accumulated fund might be accumulated because they know, gosh, that sheriff's department, they've outgrown their space and we're going to put an addition on that, or that building needs a new roof. And then again, going to this, it's not a requirement because the current language does not include shall, but I am really keeping in mind Essex County, which started out a couple years ago with no fund because the previous assistant judges didn't create one. And there's only so much that can be contributed any 1 year into that fund. And also Washington County, again, they depleted their fund. That's going to be built back up over several years. So if any county comes to the court administrator looking for inclusion in the capital budget, again, we believe that current subsection B7 with that other criteria is sufficient for the court administrator's office to ask any particular county about what their plans are, what other buildings need to be covered, what their fund is. And clearly now, the court administrator could say, do you have a fund? How much have you regularly been contributing to it? If you don't have a fund, are there extenuating circumstances like Washington County? So that really is sort of our position right now. But I do want to say that the counties understand if they have a reserve fund, it has to be subject to some kind of plan, and that the language of 4430 is where we look for the guide for the most comprehensive type of plan. Again, that from our perspective, 4430 seems to be laid out more for municipalities than counties, because the county, at the most, a county might have 3 buildings as opposed to, say, a municipality with many capital needs. But at any rate, we know that that language is there and we look to that for guidance in creating a plan. And as to the specific language, I think our request continues to be that the court and what we would work with Terry over the summer and fall, if you pass this and the report needs to be made, is that clearly we will work to help the court administrator's office understand what position the different counties are in, so that they understand what the requests would be. I don't think any county plans to make a request this year in the capital budget, but having said that, I don't think so because nobody has told me so, but I haven't asked everybody. So that's kind of where we stand. And on the various language, I know you're tweaking these lines just a little bit. I don't think we have a strong position on whether, for example, line 14 includes the reference to 24 VSA section 4430. As I said, the counties know they need a plan, and that says how to lay out a plan. So whether you have that language on line 14 or not, I don't think makes that much difference. So I don't know. I hope I've hit on the major points that have come up and clarified a couple things, but let me know if there's something else you want me to speak to.
Well, this is helpful. Thank you, Joyce. Troy?
Yeah, I don't disagree with you that what's point 7 currently, any other criteria is appropriate. Most certainly allows the court administrator to consider these things. That being said, I also don't have a problem with adding them in for the sake of clarity and bringing us all on the same page. So my question for you is, do you have are those first 3 as proposed in this amendment, are they fair? Fair questions to be considering?
Sure, I think that they're fair. Now that the court administrator is aware of these reserve funds, as they're vetting a request, clearly that would be a fair consideration. I do want to point back to a couple comments last week when Terry was speaking before the committee. There was kind of an acknowledgement that the counties really only use this process for the largest projects. And even so, for example, in 2012, Windsor County bonded $2 million. So from the county's perspective, we don't see that coming to the legislature is something that is used all that often and isn't used except for the very largest projects. But yeah, to your point, could that language be in there and not change anything too much from what's on the ground right now? Yes, it could.
Thank you.
And then Kevin?
So Joyce, what's the one county that doesn't have any money? They used it all. They used it all in the for the flood. The floods.
Washington County.
So then why? So then, and they had. So just why haven't they put money back in it?
Well, it would take a long time to build up to the 400,000 that they have.
So are they putting any money into it now?
I don't have their budget in front of me, but my understanding was they used their reserve funds. They got FEMA money and insurance money. They also took out a loan for $800,000 and paid that back in less than 2 years. So I don't have their budget in front of me, so I'm making an educated guess. I know they don't have a contribution to their budget in fiscal 2025 because I did ask that specific question. And I'm going to say that I believe it would be because they just paid off a big loan and they may be feeling as if they couldn't also begin rebuilding that fund in the same year as that's a big loan, $700,000, was a lot for them to pay. They took out a loan for $8 million, and I believe that they used $700,000 of it, and it's paid back now. So,
Thank you.
So
Sure.
if they had a project, and Kevin, just hang on here. If they had a project that they came to the court administrator with, and this law, this language was affected, they can make their case that, yes, we have a reserve fund. It got wiped out because of the flood, and it's going to take a long time to build it back up. They make their case. It's not saying just because you have a reserve fund, you're not going to get any state dollars for a capital project. It just brings more information to the discussion, and the county can say, we've had these extra issues that have come up that we weren't anticipating, so our reserve fund has been wiped out. That's why we're coming here.
Correct.
That's a legitimate statement that a county could make.
Right. Well, like all the information she just gave, that was like really helpful. I didn't realize that. No wonder why they don't have any money.
Right.
So Kevin and then Joe and then Eric, did you?
I'm just a person.
Kevin and Joe.
So I understand Washington having a real need, but what I don't understand is why Grand Isle, Franklin, Orleans, and Lamoille, they don't have any information, they don't have a fund, they have contributions.
Yeah, that's incorrect. I'm sorry.
Has a
So-
fund.
I provided you some information last week that was as much as I'd been able to get, and I think I sent some corrected information in. I now know that the only two counties that don't have any capital reserve fund is Grand Isle and Wyndham. And I have spoken to the Wyndham judges and understand their reasoning. I have not been able to speak individually with the Grand Isle judges. I don't know historically what has happened there. Franklin does have a reserve fund. My understanding it's around $220,000. They did not have a fund. I spoke with Assistant Judge Kelly Goslin, who's been there. She was elected the same year I was. So she took office in 2011, and there was no reserve fund at that point. And so they've built it up in the years since then I don't know if they have used anything from it. Again, I don't have everybody's budget, and I don't have the whole history of every county outside my own, but every county but Grand Isle and Wyndham currently have a reserve fund.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Joe?
Well, it's not really a question, but it's a statement of fact. Not all counties, or let me rephrase it, counties have different ability to raise reserve funds. So, you have two counties with less than 10,000 people in them. Yeah, and then Pittman has 165 or something like that. So, it's certainly a consideration. Now, we just spent $3.4 million on a courthouse in Essex County. I don't think it'd be reasonable for 5,900 people to pay for that.
But their budget might be smaller, their reserve fund or whatever might be smaller, but at least it shows that they're putting some skin in the game.
Sure.
It's just,
And I'm very sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt.
I'm all done.
Okay, I was just gonna throw out the current example of Essex County, and I've mentioned them before. Two new assistant judges elected in 2020, where are we? 2022. And they didn't have a fund, and they're trying to build one. It has $48,000 in it now, and they budgeted a contribution of $40,000 in fiscal 25. And they have had people attend their budget hearings and have gotten some pushback on, because they want to spend some money now to bring that courthouse into the current century. And they're getting a little pushback. It's a small county, but they're creating a fund, and a $40,000 contribution for Essex County. That's a pretty big one-year contribution.
So what we're looking at is just to give more information for the court administrator to make a decision. Just because a county has a reserve fund doesn't mean that the court administrator would say no to state capital funds being used.
Right.
The counties need to justify asking for state money. And if they have a reserve fund, that needs to be clear. It also needs to be clear, are they contributing to that reserve fund? And also, that's a time for the county to say, yes, we have this reserve fund, but we're really seeing more of an issue right now that we're going to have to spend on the sheriff's building, but we also need help on the courthouse, and we can't do both. So we need some help. It's an opportunity for the county to state their case and for all the information to be on the table so that the court administrator can make a justifiable decision. That's the goal here. It's not to tie anyone's hands. is to make sure that there's information at the table. And when we hear in testimony that, wow, we didn't even know that the counties had reserve funds for capital projects, or they have a 5-year capital plan, that's all new information. It's indicative that that information needs to be part of the picture if they're asking for state dollars. Because even for us as a committee, in testimony, when we were looking at both the Windsor County, the Essex, and then Lamoille, when it came through being recommended, we were only focusing in on the county budgets. We ourselves were not even aware that they should have a capital plan or program and a reserve fund. So that's a big chunk of information that was missing, that might have changed some decision-making, or it might not have. But it's not to tie anyone's hands behind their back. And in terms of the report back, do you find it, Joyce, helpful to know if we keep the language in 1, 2, and 3, the new language, it's effective July 1st of 26, so it doesn't go into effect until next year, but it gives the opportunity for the association as well as the court administrator to work through this, knowing what language we're going to put in place. And then come back in January with a report that, yes, this language works, we can work with it, or we got some issues with it, and this is what we propose that you change. Because if we don't put any language in, and we tell you to go figure it out, you don't have a structure to look at in terms of what to respond to. So the goal is to give you that structure to look at, and can you work within that? And come back to us come January. That's the thinking behind it.
Correct. And yes, absolutely, we can work within that structure. And I think that whether this amendment passed or not, a couple things have happened. One is that the assistant judges we've started a conversation about this whole issue. And the second thing is that we want to, even if the reporting requirement was not in there, I think it is incumbent upon both the judiciary through the court administrator's office and the counties to begin looking further out in terms of what projects might be required at what courthouses, so that we begin a strategic thinking process and planning process, so that we're not caught flat-footed and finding that we suddenly have a need of some kind. So that I think that would start regardless. But yes, we can certainly work within the reporting structure as written right now.
Other questions of the committee? So where are we, folks?
I agree with everything you said a couple minutes ago. I think you were dead right. So,
Well, folks? One all speak at once.
well, I mean, I've already said my piece, but I just sort of go back to having these things in place helps everybody, including the county, and recognizing obviously every county is different. The budget's not going to look exactly the same, et cetera. But having, it no longer be kind of an option, just having everybody have to have something there makes sense to me. And I know it's not exactly what this says, but I think it would benefit everybody. But I'm also fine with, your points that might be over prescriptive to tell them they have to have.
So are we okay with the proposed language in 1, 2, and 3? And we reference section 133 instead of 4430 in all of those. And then if we go to the report, we need some changes to the report in terms of who's going to be doing the look-see and who reports back. and also to include any proposed legislative changes. So have you been working on that at all, Eric?
I have
Okay.
my
You have,
edits to this language right here on the paper. I think I got a handle on what the committee's looking for.
read it?
Yeah.
Maybe
It'll
not.
come to me, hopefully.
You want more time to work on?
Yeah, but I think you probably would want to see a clean copy.
Yes.
I think just before you, I don't know if it's your intent ultimately is to vote on it, but either way, whether it's just a straw poll or a vote, either way, I think you'd want to see some clean language,
Copy.
which we could do, I don't know, tomorrow morning, Thursday afternoon, something like that, whatever works for you. I am in the Senate tomorrow afternoon, but I have tomorrow morning or Thursday afternoon.
Do you
Do we have any-
have the gist of it so that if there are
We
any,
now do have a 9 o'clock with Alexander Bailey.
How about after the floor tomorrow afternoon?
I'll be on the Senate floor.
Wednesday?
Wednesday, yes. She did it later, like say you did it at like 3:30, something like that, or Thursday morning, or
I want to get it done. So we're tied up at 9, tied up at 10, that's gonna take. 30. How late are you tied up on the Senate tomorrow?
hard to predict. I'd say probably be done. They start at 1, probably be done by 3:30 for sure.
On the Senate floor.
Correct.
Why don't we do it after the Senate floor? And then,
Okay, works for me.
why don't we do it after the Senate floor? 3 or 3:30?
Yeah.
And then you'll come in with a new draft.
And I could probably, if you preferred, I could send it to Phil tonight if you wanted to have it posted so that you guys could have an opportunity to look at it
That
before
would work, and also
noon.
send a copy to Joyce and send a copy to Terry as well. So they can get a heads up. Does that work for you tomorrow, Joyce, to zoom in around 3:30?
Yes, sorry, I muted instead of been muting. Yes, absolutely, I can be here.
Okay. And Terry, do you want to weigh in at all on this before we finish, or?
No, I agree with what all that has been said, and I look forward to the new draft, and I'm also here tomorrow. That's fine too.
Great. So, new draft.
I don't have Joyce's email though. Phil, do you have it by any chance?
Yeah.
Yeah. Great, thank you.
And also we'll include the other two judges too, the one from Bennington and the one from Wyndham. And letting them know too. Anything else on this? Connor?
I just say like, maybe next year, a couple points came up, what Joe said resonated with me, and that like the state kind of needs to be the equalizer here. When different counties have different abilities to raise money, and maybe that needs to be stated in here next year, I'm thinking. The other piece is there's a bullet about the emergency that affects court operations. But a flood won't necessarily do that. It might, as Joyce said, drown out your reserves there, and there might need to be some consideration, because not all counties get hit with natural disasters the same either, and I hate to see my county here being depleted of all their funds because of a flood, and if that could affect their ability in the future. So just a couple of things I think to think about maybe as people are mulling over the reports.
Yep.
And I love that report that you gave us, that you gave an update that shows each county and what they've got in their reserve fund. And if you happen to have an update of that, that would be nice to have that, if that's reasonable.
And
You know what I'm referring to?
yes, and I'll go through that and I'll make sure that I update that with whatever figures I've been given.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Joyce. We really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Anything else? Great. Thank you. Thank you, Eric.
You bet. Thanks, everybody.
So let's
See you tomorrow.
move on because we're running a little late. And if you have to take a break, take a break.
Would it be so kind as to hand that to Connor? Connor, it belongs to him. Thank you. Thank you for running that out without your knowledge.
That's what I'm going to say.
Vibrating my neck. Normally it hurts, but today it's worse.
All right.
But yeah, it's
Put the pressure on.
basically. It'll be a little bit, I'll be back.
Okay, go down to Sergeant.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Well, I'm gonna leave this committee. We're gonna search for the.
Okay, so we're gonna shift gears, folks, like we always do. We took some testimony from BGS, who's back in the room, on the courthouse security, on state building security, H 349. So if you could pull out your bill for 349. And we heard quite a bit of testimony from BGS in terms of how they approach security at our state buildings under their jurisdiction. We also heard from the court in terms of their security at the courthouses. And today we're going to hear from VSEA on their response to H 349. So Steve, is it all yours?
It is me.
Vince was here and then he left.
Yes, I kicked him out because his phone rang during the hearing, which means I think we should eliminate the Essex County State's Attorney's Office.
It's aggressive.
Don't pick on Vin.
Good old Vince.
I said one thing before we walked in, which is don't embarrass me.
On the phone.
Phone goes off.
And it's phone.
Okay, so it's all yours, Steve. So
Thank you, Madam Chair.
identify yourself for the record.
Sure. I'm Steve Howard. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont State Employees Association, and we represent the frontline workers in state government and in our judicial system as well. And I want to thank the committee for taking up this bill and spending so much time on it. It means a great deal to our members who are in very precarious positions in the world we live in today. And it's sort of fitting that you're taking it up this year. This year marks the 30th anniversary of the Oklahoma City bombing, in which 168 public employees were killed, 684 were injured. It is also the 10th anniversary this August of the brutal murder of Lara Sobel, who was shot not once, but twice as she walked out of Berry City Place, hoping to spend the weekend with her family. So this is an issue that is very personal for the members of the VSEA. They're living in a world in which it is somewhat hostile towards public employees. They're called names, they're attacked, they're told that they're part of some deep state conspiracy that many people believe. And they show up in state government, in the courthouses, at the work sites where our members are just trying to do their jobs. It's really important to be here as a representative of the workers. So there's a lot of folks on this committee. The only official voice of the workers is the union. We were elected by the members to speak for them. Management does not speak for the workers. And I think it's really important to reemphasize that over and over again. What management hears from workers will often be very, Connor knows this, will be often very different than what they'll tell their union. So it's really important that the union have an opportunity to speak on this important legislation. I think we want to start by saying that the work that BGS is doing is good work. It's not work that we think somehow needs to stop. We think it should continue. And we think it's valuable work. And there's no doubt that the frontline folks who are members of the SEA in many cases are doing an extraordinary job with the resources they have. And we think all of those would transfer to the Safety and Security Board should that be put in place. I would say we first worked with our members and with members of the legislature to craft this bill and introduce it right after Lara's murder. And one thing that's not always told, and folks may not know about what happened there, is that 2 weeks before her murder, the members of the DCF Family Services Labor Management Committee sat with their managers and said, somebody's going to get hurt in a parking lot. somebody is going to get seriously hurt in a parking lot. We keep saying to you, the parking lots need to be secured. 2 weeks later, Lara was murdered in a parking lot, an unsecured parking lot. So for our members, the response to that murder and to the environment that we find ourselves in has been too slow and too weak and not reflective of the times. And I think I heard the testimony of management, and I think they are sincere in their desire to protect the folks that work with them. I think that is legitimate. I think that is real. But for the folks who are at the front counter, the folks who are going to meet with people in state office buildings on a daily basis, their experience is a lot different than what management experiences. And what this bill asks of the legislature and of state government is that state employees who are enforcing the law have the same protections as those who are making the law, including the governor and the legislature. The purpose of this bill is to create independence, professionalism, and a non-political approach to safety and security. Now, we have a lot of respect for the Secretary of Administration, current Secretary of Administration. We have a lot of respect for Commissioner Manoli. And of course for Terry Corsones, the court administrator. They won't always be in those positions, and they haven't always been in those positions. And so one of the experiences our members have had as they've raised safety and security concerns and tried to have a dialogue with the folks in BGS who are in charge of the safety and security of their workplaces. In previous administrations, more than in this administration, but could be true in future administrations, is that the Secretary of Administration at the time, not the current one, basically ordered them not to speak to the union. That this was not an issue that they thought required the level of attention and urgency that the union felt it did, representing the people who are, for all intents and purposes, on the front lines in the line of fire. And they said to us, very esteemed professional directors of safety and security with very impressive resumes, we are in serious trouble here and I'm not allowed to speak to you about it. So that left us with no place to go but to try to make some change in the legislature that would eliminate the political element of that discussion, which is why that board is proposed. It's also important that since our members are on the front lines and are the folks who are most likely to be injured or worse, that we have a voice in the process, that there be a board that includes VSEA members, because often it's the VSEA members who know where the security risks are. They know where the problems are. And so this process, this new board would give the 3 seats to the members of the VSEA, including management, and would create an equal voice on something that affects their lives. It would also centralize and create a consistency aligned with the Department of Public Safety, a police force that would mirror the Capitol Police that we all benefit from in this building. And what it would allow us to do is to have consistency throughout state government and throughout all the courthouses, consistent training, consistent protocols, and all throughout that whole system. And we feel much better about it. Our members don't support the use of private contractors to provide security. We don't. And in every state office building you go into, you will hear members come to us and say, we are concerned about how seriously the management is taking our safety. They can't even staff the security that we have with permanent classified employees. They have private contractors. See, it's also a serious issue in leased buildings. Often the state will lease buildings because they can hire private janitorial services and private security services, and they can just put that off the books. And our members don't like that. And they don't think the level of security and safety is the same when a private contractor is providing it. So this bill would provide consistency throughout the entire system. And again, it would provide the folks enforcing the law the same protections as the folks making the law, the governor who has a security detail and the state legislature that has the Capitol Police. We also believe that this is an issue of such importance and a mammoth issue across all of state government that it's not going to get all fixed in 1 year. This is at least a decade's worth of work that needs to be done. That there needs to be consistent and regular review from an independent person who is a professional in safety and security, who is reporting to folks who have an interest in it, but who is required to provide a report, a public report that says, here are our problems, and here's how much we need to fix those problems. It's a transparent process that allows the SEA to come and advocate for the investments that are needed to upgrade safety and security. You heard testimony from the managers that, we don't have safety, we don't have security in all the buildings all throughout state government, which is something that is well known to our members. Just this summer, we had an interesting situation in White River Junction, where ironically, seated at the Lara Sobel Memorial table in White River, outside the state office building, we had a gentleman there cleaning his AR-15 in a building that is occupied by DCF and corrections. You can imagine the calls that the union received, and it took the unions fighting to get law enforcement there, even on a temporary basis, to make sure that that gentleman understood the inappropriateness of having an automatic weapon, which he could have, he's allowed to have, in that leased building at that table. The inappropriateness of that for people coming in and into the building, and particularly for the people working in the building. It was a Herculean effort. We were pleased that the administration did send law enforcement and did lock the building down, but it took some doing to make that happen. We have experience, our members have experience, that the presence of a certified law enforcement officer, in addition to the BGS staff, is a disincentive for bad behavior. And a case in point is the DCF Economic Services Office in Burlington, where our members came to us and expressed concern about activity that was occurring in that office. There were allegations, or I guess our members witnessed a lot of drug trafficking happening, people getting into fights, really difficult situations, while our members are sitting there trying to process benefits for people in their worst hours of need. So this is also not just about our members' safety and security, it's also about our constituents feeling safe. When we lobbied for a sheriff's deputy to be in the lobby, to be seated and to be stationed in the lobby, all of that behavior stopped. All of that activity stopped because somebody was there who has the power to arrest. And that's what our members really want. They want someone there who has the power to arrest. We also know that local police departments who BGS has to call to arrest somebody are strapped. I mean, you just read in the paper, you know that your police departments are strapped. They are dealing with more than they can handle. The state, in our view, should take responsibility for this important priority and provide law enforcement who have the power to arrest and not push this burden off onto local police departments. So that is really I think the nuts and bolts of why our members are so supportive of this bill, and hopeful that we know it can't really move anywhere this year, but hopeful that we've started a conversation that will result in change to the approach to safety and security that reflects their reality and what they're seeing each and every day in the courthouses and the state office buildings across state government. So I thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunity to testify.
So the way the bill is drafted, there would be a Vermont State Building Security Board. They would be the ones that would establish and oversee the safety and security of the workplace, the work site, where there's state employees as well as the judiciary. So currently BGS has that. What the bill does is takes it away from BGS and gives it to this new security board. What it would also do is it would create a police department, buildings and courthouse, police department that would be under the Department of Public Safety. And there would be a chief of this new department that would be appointed by the Commissioner of the Department of Public Safety. That's in essence what it
Yes, correct.
does. And the members' concern, really the highlight of the members' concern is they would like someone on site that has the power to arrest, is one piece. But they also want to have the whole security piece as an independent body, non-political, and a police force that's consistent throughout the state, within our state buildings. That's the gist of the bill. But the gist of it takes it away from BGS, puts it in this board. So do you have BGS, the folks right now that are doing security under BGS, are they union folks?
Except where there are private contractors. So for instance, if you walk into, well, that building's closed now, but if you walked into the, what was the Zampieri building,
Right, 108.
you had one of the largest state office buildings, you had private security there.
So for those union members, if they got shifted away from BGS into a board, what happens to them?
They would essentially remain members of the VSEA. They would still be in a union position. They would just report to the director who reports to an independent.
So they would be employed by the board. They'd be.
Still be state employees and they'd still be in the bar.
To the board and not be a BGS employee.
Right. Still in the bargaining unit.
And for some leased buildings, sometimes the state, it depends how that lease is negotiated with the owner of the building in terms of who provides the maintenance and who provides the security for that. So sometimes it's the owner of that building, not the state, that provides the security.
Right. So that lends to the argument of the need for consistency and the need for really for control. One of the concerns that in our courthouses in particular, our members have with, they don't have any particular concerns with the particular sheriff's deputies, but that sheriff's deputy reports to the sheriff, not to the court administrator or not to the folks who are running that particular courthouse. What our members believe is that we need a law enforcement entity that we have more control over, and that it's not at the whim of the sheriff. And in the legislation that the court administrator discussed in the process that we had recently, we asked that the deputies be assigned, who are assigned to the courthouses, be akin to the state transport deputies, that they be state employees, that they, and part of that was for recruitment and retention, because healthcare benefits, it's something that the deputies don't always receive when they're reporting to the same extent the state employees have it. So we thought it would be a recruitment and retention tool, but it would also offer what our members believe is more control over the law enforcement folks who are in the building.
So in terms of the courthouse, the security for our courthouses is under the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court.
Mm-hmm.
Is that by state law or is that by constitution? Our constitution?
I believe well, there is a separation of powers issue, but BGS does provide security in many of the, it is probably both constitutional and statutory.
Because it's here in the statute, the security for the space occupied by the court shall be under the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. So that's being moved from the Supreme Court to the board.
Mm-hmm.
New board. And that may be constitutional.
Could be.
It may not be constitutional. Questions? Sure.
It is constitutional. That's what I was going to ask. And that's testimony we've received. Interpretation of the constitutional chapter 3 is that the Supreme Court shall have administrative control over all the courts of the state. And I agree with that interpretation as I'm reading it right in front of me here. So yeah, I do. That was going to be my I just wanted to give you an opportunity to comment on that.
And so I think there could be a memorandum of understanding between the court and the executive branch, much like we do with BGS services that are provided to the courthouses. There could be an arrangement that the court would agree to this police presence, this police organization providing the security. It was an idea that I spoke to the previous court administrator about at the time when they were struggling to cover courthouses with sheriffs, where they're having pretty tense negotiations with the sheriffs about reimbursement rates, I think was the issue. And it seemed intriguing to them. So I think there would have to be some agreement by the court. But it was certainly something that our members would advocate for.
Thank you.
Questions? Thoughts? Connor?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to take off my union hat after working there for a decade, but, now I'm in a position where I probably represent more state employees than any other district in the state here in Montpelier. And, there's what's real, there's what's perception. I'll admit I was pretty impressed by the presentation last week. I saw some passion there in doing the right thing with security. But I think just like the aging buildings we look at every year, we need to keep coming back to this and making sure we're using best practices and, adjusting as need be. I knew Lara, that still haunts me. She was a member of mine. And I talked to constituents who are afraid to walk to their car at night. And it really ranges between what their job is, right? Because if you're working in some of these human services jobs, the highly personal nature of it, if you're supervising someone in the community, if you're had a role in taking away a kid or something, that's stuff that people don't get over and they obsess over it. And they're very interested in the personalities of people involved in this. So I think the scope of this bill, as Steve said, it might be a bit sticker shock for 1 year here. But I'm just interested in keep creating a system where we analyze this, maybe look at best practices. Maybe it is a board and the police force comes later or something. But I can't overemphasize. There's 1,000 vacancies in state government right now. You can be paid more somewhere else. You can be safer somewhere else too. And it all factors into the recruitment and retention here. So security is a piece of that. It's just a rant. I don't know.
Yeah, I think one thing that's really important, you started with a very important thing. It's not just that you are safe, it's that you perceive that you're safe. Because it is I can tell you that not a lot of work got done in June or July or whatever month that was in the White River State Office building because people were afraid. They were scared. And when you can't ask people to work in that environment, particularly given the history that Vermont has experienced, it is telling that, one good example of something that would be a priority for VSEA is that the parking lots be secured. And that the public not have access to the parking lots, where DCF is in particular, probation and parole is in particular, but generally for any state employee. We asked for that 2 weeks before Lara was murdered. We've asked for it every year since, and none of the parking lots have been secured. There's not even BGS staff, security staff, existing staff sitting there in the parking lot. And I think many of our members believe if somebody had been in Barre City Place, even just driving through, they would have noticed Jody Herring sitting there with her rifle on her front set, sitting right there, visible in her car, ranting and raving for hours. And they might have warned somebody not to walk. They might have done something about it. We can't tell. That's, but it is telling that even that parking lot's not secured now.
Questions? Sean?
Yeah. So it's sad. Oklahoma City was awful. But if you're dealing with someone, and I have always said this about 9/11, when you're willing to die, you can do anything and no one's going to stop you. If you want to to me, I kind of feel, I understand, I need to know more about where you're coming from. Mm-hmm. But looking at, the presentation that BGS gave us, they have a service where they'll walk you to the car. And I think that there's, and I didn't ask, but it sounded like if someone needs to get walked to a car, they get walked to a car. I guess I saw that as they have a really thorough system. Their emergency procedure planning is in place. I kind of felt really comfortable about that. I don't feel good about when you ask to secure a parking lot, are you talking about fencing and razor wire and all? I mean, I don't know if I don't particularly want to see that. I mean,
You can look at the federal building in Burlington as an example.
how's that look? I don't know. I mean,
I have a picture of that.
it just so happened.
Or you could look at any state police barracks.
Yeah, so it's just a fence.
Pretty high fence though.
Yeah,
It adds a.
I mean, I don't know. I kind of feel like I'd have to be convinced more of it because I was convinced that BGS is doing a really good job right now. And if you're only talking about I don't want to belittle someone's death. That is heartbreaking and awful that Laura died. I mean, everyone was captivated by that. And it's awful that happened. I don't know if this, recreating some other level of government where my constituency is telling me calm it down, not grow it. I have a harder time being convinced of it. That's all, Steve.
I think
nothing personal.
Yeah, no, I understand that. And I think the work that BGS is doing is valuable. So if someone does need somebody to walk out with them, that's very helpful.
Right.
If they walk out and they meet somebody with a firearm who begins to shoot at them, there's nothing they can do at that point.
There's nothing anybody can do at that.
A law enforcement officer would be trained to respond and would have a weapon and would know how to respond in that case. So that I think is the difference between what is valuable, what our members see as valuable, and what our members see as life-saving.
But that shooting at that high school in Florida, there was a police officer there who got in his car and ran and left the scene when there was someone inside shooting. So I'd again have to be, it's a tough call. To me, it's not black and white. So
certainly there are, I think I'm not familiar with this situation in Florida, but I think there are many instances where law enforcement officers have behaved heroically in those moments,
right,
and have gone toward the fire.
Right.
So we would hope that they would do that in these instances. But I think that that's a good example of the difference between what our members are hoping for,
right,
and what they think they need, and what we currently provide. Not that what we currently provide isn't valuable, but if your only tactic in those moments is that you can call the local police, an understaffed agency, and hope that they can respond in time to save people's lives, that's going to be too little too late. So that's why we believe there needs to be a presence of a trained, certified law enforcement officer in these buildings.
Okay. So, I mean, I think if there are legitimate deficiencies, they need to be dealt with on their own merits. But I believe that should be able to be accomplished within its own framework. And if it's not with one party, then we need to go to another party. But to create a state security board that frankly, under most circumstances, is almost going to be quasi-controlled by VSCA, because you would appoint 3 out of the 7 members. I'm just not okay with philosophically.
Well, as legislators, when a board is set up, we can always change membership. That's part of our process. There's a proposal made, doesn't mean that we accept that proposal. As we do set up boards, then we do talk about who would be on the board.
Absolutely. And I think VSCA is, because our members have the interest, probably the greatest level of interest in having the best safety and security plan the state could have, we would seek to work collaboratively with the administration. The difference is it wouldn't stop at the administration. So right now we have a labor management committee in our contract, which you heard Mr. Salas refer to, the Safety and Health Committee. And their mission, they meet, they talk about safety issues. they can send a letter to the Secretary of Administration. Now, I have no doubt that Sarah Clark would take us very seriously and she would approach it. Previous secretaries have not. They've ignored those letters. And future secretaries could also ignore those letters. So we need something more than just, we're going to send a letter. We need something with some teeth that says, hey, Mr. Director of Safety and Security, you report to us. And we're part of that process. But we also need a place to go with the executive and the legislature to say, this is what a independent, unpolitically aligned person who doesn't report to a politician is telling you need to do and how much it's going to cost. It gives our members and the public the transparency they're seeking, and it allows us to advocate for our members on behalf of this independent professional who has provided the report. It's kind of like in the bargaining process, a fact finder. The fact finder's report that comes out between the two sides, that's the professional's report about what needs to be done. So that's really what we favor. And it's not a reflection on anybody personally, or it's really an idea that we should have a voice, we should have a seat at the table. We should have a consistent review. There should be money attached to that. And we should also have a stepped up presence of law enforcement in the work sites.
It's not my own point. I just wanted to hear more from Joe. What's the philosophical objection?
Well, I think that the administration's job is to administer state government. I mean, I don't know how I can respond to that further. So now we have, in this case, the way the bill's drafted, non-state of Vermont government entity controlling what would be a lot of state dollars, or having a very big voice thereof.
Would be a state entity. It would still be a state entity.
It'd be a state entity controlled by non-elected state employees association, which is not part of the state of Vermont government. As it's drafted. That's I see section starting line 6 on page 8 or 4, excuse me, which talks about how the Vermont State Building Security Board is constituted, whereby of the 7 members, 2 would be appointed by the governor, 1 by the state court administrator or designee, 1 by the attorney general, and 3 by the president of the Vermont State Employees Association.
I mean, here again, though, we can mix up the membership. This is just very familiar to me from the education committee. There was often frustration with the perceived politicization of the agency. And, there are different ways of looking at information.
Well, I think everything's political. You're just changing who the political people are.
Yeah.
They're just not elected ones, but
yeah,
everybody has a bias when they wake up in the morning.
Sure.
Everybody has a perspective.
Yeah. Okay.
So Steve, how is the impact now on remote work that's occurring? A lot of our folks are working remotely. They may come in 1 day a week. But our state office buildings or buildings are not as populated as they used to be 5 years ago, pre-COVID. How does that impact going forward with security?
Well, I think there's 2 separate issues. For the folks who are reporting, for instance, economic services, I was just describing the Burlington situation. Economic services, they are fully working in the work site.
Because they're providing services to clients who are coming into the building.
They're public facing, and they're often in a position where they have to say the rules that the legislature has adopted or the federal government has adopted make you ineligible for housing or make you ineligible for the assistance you need to feed your children. That sometimes elicits a response that is not calm and welcoming, but can be violent and threatening. So in that building, it would be helpful to have a level of security that meets that threat. And I will say that we did have a significant amount of reporting during the height of the hotel motel situation where our members did experience a great deal of hostility and threats for regulations they did not put in place. So there's a difference between making laws, signing bills, and enforcing the law. It's our members are enforcing the law. And I also will just say, because I think it's sometimes goes, we forget often our members in the Agency of Natural Resources that have to tell people they have to stop polluting. They can't do what they're doing with their land, that or the hunting and fishing enforcement that elicits a lot of hostility towards the employee who is enforcing the state law. Again, a law they didn't craft, and they didn't sign, but they're there to enforce.
So if there's a situation where there's an employee, DCF, Economic Services, where the tension is rising and they're feeling threatened, do they have an emergency button that they can hit?
There are some panic buttons. Yes, there are some. And those are great.
Is it nearby where the employee is working? And do all employees know where that panic button is?
I can't answer that with certainty. I do know I've been in meetings in like VSEA chapter meetings where it was very clear the right hand didn't know what the left hand was doing. And there have been discussions of, like, for instance, about safety plans. One department sort of knew what the plan was. The rest of the departments didn't know what the plan was. And the training really didn't really address it. There was different training and it was confusion.
They have regular training in each of the state office buildings?
I think they
of if it's an active shooter, or do you shelter in place? Do you hide, run? Do you hide? Is there regular training?
I think they do, but there was a difference, at least in a couple of meetings that I've been in, where it's the whole, folks from each department in the whole building.
Yeah.
There is a lot of confusion. There has often been a lot of confusion about what the training is. Sometimes the training seemed to be different. Sometimes one department got one piece of advice, another department got another piece of advice. But we've had some real world experiences where there was also confusion about who was in charge. So we had a terrible situation happen in the Asa Bloomer building in Rutland, where somebody went to the 4th floor, jumped off, and died by suicide. It was unclear for a while who was in charge there.
But isn't there also some private entities in that building? So it's not all state.
At that time, I believe there was private security. It's been
private entities operating in the building beyond state.
Right now, I don't think so. I think originally there was a restaurant, there were some businesses on the 1st floor. But
so I'm just thinking of state office buildings, and I'm thinking of the one in Springfield where we have DMV on the bottom floor for folks to come in to do their DMV business, whatever that may be. And then we have P&P, we have DCF, we have Economic Services, Department of Health. And I know we had some A&R folks in there as well.
Yeah.
So when there's training, does it come from individual departments or agencies?
I don't think so, but I think it's I think in a couple of instances, and this is just anecdotal, the communication about when the training was occurring and whether people should be there for it was different based on which department was, how it was being communicated to people. Incidentally, the building in White River Junction has no security. You can walk right in. And for a while, I think Springfield was also, you could walk right in. They may have changed that. I know in Rutland, after this incident, they have secured, you can't walk in anymore. You used to be able to go right to the elevator and go upstairs if you wanted to. So that's been changed at least. And BGS security is back, which we're very happy about because our members were not satisfied at all with the private contractor that was there before. So I think it differs. I don't think it's necessarily BGS's fault. I think it's just maybe how it's being communicated. But, you asked, Madam Chair, about remote work. So I do think we have an obligation to the folks who are reporting to a work site to make sure they are safe and secure. But you also have heard us testify in this committee that we believe that we need to get we need to take a look at these office buildings and really repurpose many of them. Because we don't think, our view is remote work is here to stay if we want to employ anybody for the state of Vermont. And we have all this office space that really could be converted into housing or childcare or adult daycare, which might help with the 1,000 vacancies if we provide that to state employees. But that's an issue for bargaining, I think, instead of the legislature. I think once we get that, there's sort of an opportunity as we look at how many buildings we need and what buildings we're using, there's an opportunity to also say, okay, how do we address the new world that we're living in and secure the buildings in a way that increases the level of safety, but also increases the perception that you're safe, which right now our members don't have. They do not feel in many of the buildings they're working in that they're safe.
Questions, comments, before we finish up and take a quick break?
I just, the parking lot, and again, it might be where I am in Montpelier. It's a very real issue here in town. I mean, I don't want to attribute it to anything in particular. It's just a voucher program. We have seen an increase in crime downtown. There was, guy I know, Gabe, right on Taylor Street near the state lot there, was stabbed, fighting for his life like year before that. But yeah, that's right by a state lot, so there's sort of the personal connection with employees who may have like a client might have a beef with them or something. But then there's just, we took the tour the other day. People were sleeping in the doorways of the state buildings, and that can be intimidating for people going to work, So I just love to maybe spend some time at some point talking about the parking lots. And I'm sure, the chief of the Montpelier Police Department would have some strong thoughts on this too, because our department has had trouble keeping a full staff there. And the demands of state government with the protest on the lawn, every weekend really does exhaust the services of our local police department. So,
Questions? Thoughts? So, thank you, Steve.
Thank you very much.
Where we're
Thank you.
gonna go at this point, we'll have more committee discussion. We are. So let's take a very quick break.
Yeah.
Take 10 minutes. Back here about 5 after 3. We have a full afternoon of some testimony on the second look. Bill, the 379.
Eliminated.